Hey guys, what is the best digital FPV system for you? Is it DJI or is it Walksnail? I am a DJI flyer, but I've been hearing more and more about Walksnail and how much better it's gotten since it launched, and I really wanted to see how it compares to DJI. I know a lot of you guys out there are in a similar place because it's not just the goggles. You're going to end up with a bunch of drones with pricey VTXs and cameras that are only going to work with one system or the other. I'm not going to tell you guys whether you should buy Walksnail or DJI, but I am going to talk about my experience with each system, their advantages and disadvantages, and give you some information that will help you decide which system is best for you. To test the Walksnail system, I'm using the Goggles X and a GoFilm 20, which is a 2-inch CineWhoop that's running a Walksnail Moonlight VTX. Now, Walksnail does have a cheaper set of box goggles on the market called the Goggles L, and several different camera and VTX combos, including smaller and lighter VTXs that you might install on a micro drone, and more powerful VTXs that you might install on a larger long-range drone. For the sake of comparison with the DJI system, I am using a set of DJI Integra goggles and a Beta FPV Pavo 20 Pro running the DJI O3 Air unit. There is a lot to talk about in this video, so I'm going to break down the information into a few bite-sized chapters. There are timestamps in the video description, so feel free to skip around. The camera on the Walksnail Moonlight system that I'm using has an f2.1 equivalent aperture, and the field of view is 160 degrees. It has a native 16:9 sensor, and I do record in 16:9 aspect ratio. It will record in 4K 60, which I think is the perfect balance between smooth FPV feed and high-quality DVR recordings. The bit rate is 150 megabits per second, which makes that 4K 60 FPS video look great. When I compare the image quality of the Walksnail Moonlight system to the DJI O3, in most lighting conditions, I actually prefer the look of the footage I get from my Moonlight DVR. I'm consistently getting footage with colors that look more natural, with better exposure, and less muddy black shadows. I've always really struggled to get exposure right with my DJI O3 cameras, unless I'm flying in perfect lighting conditions or bright sunlight. Any camera looks good when the sun is out. The challenge is when it's cloudy or you're flying somewhere with a lot of shadows, like under trees or even indoors. I did have my shutter speed set to automatic in these shots. The reason for that is because I only have the ND8 filter that came with the GoFilm 20. If you want to lock your shutter speed at twice the frame rate to get that natural looking motion blur, you will need to pick up some stronger ND filters for those sunny days. Auto exposure worked pretty well in the Walksnail system. You can see it adjusting exposure as I fly from sunlight into shadows. The DJI O3 does have a flat color profile called D-Cine-like, and it will record in 10-bit, which allows you to recover a little bit of that dynamic range in post. As I'm making this video, Walksnail does not have a flat color profile or the option to film in 10-bit. Both of these systems will over-sharpen the image on the default settings, and you'll want to turn down sharpening if you don't want your footage to look super digital. Both of them have very good built-in electronic image stabilization, and both of them are compatible with GyroFlow. The Goggles X have a 1080p screen which will do up to 100 frames per second, which is the same as the modern DJI goggles with the exception of the budget Goggles N3, which will only do 60 frames per second. The field of view on the Goggles X is 50 degrees and the Goggles Integra is 44 degrees. On the Goggles 2 it's 51 degrees and on the Goggles 3 it's 44 degrees. When it comes to field of view, too narrow means you can't see as much around you, and too wide makes it hard to focus the corners, and it can be harder to see OSD elements at the edges. But anything between 40 to 50 degrees is pretty acceptable for FPV pilots, and it comes down to personal preference. Personally, I find that a 50-degree field of view is very immersive and a little bit nicer for seeing as many details as possible in your surroundings, and I'm just able to keep the entire image in focus. Although it is a challenge to keep both the center and the corner of the image clear at the same time, so it feels to me like these goggles are as wide as I would ever want. When it comes to latency, both systems use variable latency, which means the system will adjust the amount of latency according to the conditions at any given moment, basically increasing latency to maintain decent picture quality longer as the signal gets weaker. If latency is your main concern, for example, if you're a racer or if you just value your FPV experience over everything else, Walksnail does have a race mode available, so be sure to check out Walksnail's other VTXs. One very cool feature of the Goggles X is the ability to display the approximate distance that your quad is from you based on how long it takes the VTX signal to get back to your goggles. This is not nearly as accurate as a GPS-based distance from home, but it's still a very useful feature to have built in on these little tiny micros where it might not be feasible to install a GPS, and I found that it was a useful reference for me. All right, you guys, now let's take a close look at the design of the Goggles X. The build quality feels great. They're solid and well made. The Goggles X do feel much heavier in my hands than my DJI Integras. They weigh about 320 grams. They don't look as sleek and streamlined as my Goggles Integra, but they do feel great in the hands and have some very cool built-in LEDs that make you look like an alien if you're into that sort of thing. If you don't like the LEDs, you can change the colors or turn them off entirely in the settings. For you long-range flyers, Caddx has an inexpensive patch antenna upgrade available that's super sleek because it improves the range without adding bulk, and you don't have to remove the antennas when you throw them in your bag. The stock antennas that come with the Goggles X are fine. Since I'm flying the GoFilm 20, the range that these antennas provide are more than enough, since this little quad is designed for getting close-in cinematic shots, and that means I'm flying low and slow and I'm not going out very far. I don't ever have the need to fly my drones to the edge of the VTX range, but I am interested in getting the best possible signal penetration when I fly behind trees or other obstacles. My Walksnail system is giving me great range and penetration, especially considering I'm using the stock antennas on the goggles and the little whip antennas on the drone. If you need a VTX to put in something much bigger, like this Mose 7, Walksnail has you covered with their GT VTX, which has a massive 2 watts of output power. I've got one of those on order and I'm super excited to test it in some long range applications. If you do want to fly medium or long range, fortunately it's super easy to upgrade to long range antennas because these are standard RP SMA connectors. For me, this antenna design is a huge advantage of the Walksnail Goggles X over any of the modern DJI goggles, none of which have removable antennas. The exception to this is the old school DJI goggles, like the V1 and V2s that I've got here, or even the Goggles 2, but the Goggles 2 have MCX connectors, which are not quite as common or easy to work with as the RPSMA connectors. I really wish DJI had given us the option of replaceable antennas, but that's DJI for you. Another big difference with the Goggles X is that there's no built-in battery, while there is a built-in battery with all the modern DJI goggles. Again, the exception being the older V1 and V2 goggles and the Goggles 2. The Goggles X come with this power cable that has an XT60 on one side and a barrel jack on the other side. They will take up to 26 volts, and what that means is you can use any of your flight packs, even a fully charged 6S pack. Or you can just pick up some inexpensive lithium-ion packs and the goggles will go for several hours on one of these. A built-in battery like the DJI goggles have is a more streamlined approach because you don't have to deal with a cable dangling down from your goggles, assuming you put your goggles battery in your pocket like I do. The biggest disadvantage of a built-in battery for me is that when the battery runs out, especially as the goggles age and those cells start to lose their pep, you can't just swap batteries as easily. On the top of the Goggles X, we've got air vents, a 5D joystick, a back button, a record button, and a recessed link button that's also used for firmware upgrades. Inside the goggles, we've got some air vents and a proximity sensor. On the right side, we have that barrel jack for power. On the left side, we have an air intake. And on the bottom, we have mini HDMI in and out, There are diopter adjustment knobs which allow you to adjust both interpupillary distance and to focus your image on the screen, which is handy for folks with corrective lenses. I am able to get a sharp image with these focus adjustment knobs, and my eyesight is far from perfect. But one disadvantage that I have noticed is that since the knobs don't lock like they do on some of the DJI goggles, these knobs are sometimes twisted by accident as I put the goggles into my backpack and take them out. And so I do need to readjust them from time to time. Now, when it comes to comfort, no modern digital FPV goggles are particularly comfortable out of the box. They all come with this craptastic rubber foam material, and they all have issues with fitment and light leak, and it's up to us, the end users, to find aftermarket foams to make them more comfortable and more usable. I have to go on a little rant here, you guys. These are my original SkyZone O3O goggles. They solved some of the fitment problems by including two different face plates, and the foam that they use is this soft plush foam that's super comfortable. These are some of the most comfortable FPV goggles I've ever put on my face, but of course they're analog, so I don't use them much anymore. For some reason, digital goggles just aren't that comfortable out of the box. It's as if with every step forward in image quality, we take a step back in comfort, and I don't understand why. Fortunately, there are loads of cheap aftermarket foams available for the Goggles X and any of the other goggles on the market. My preference are the Newbie Drone Max Comfort foams, which solve all my problems with light leak and they make the goggles super comfortable. I'm running the same Newbie Drone Max Comfort foams on my Goggles Integra. And on my Goggles V2s, I'm using some super plush, oversized foam, which make them nice and comfortable. I'll link to my favorite foams in the video description below, and you can check them out and see if they work for you. After flying both of these systems side by side, I'm going to leave you with some of my thoughts on why you might want to consider Walksnail over DJI. As an FPV pilot, what I care most about is getting cinematic shots, and for me, image quality is everything. The Walksnail Moonlight holds its own against the DJI O3, and when it comes to the quality of the 4K 60 frames per second footage, I actually prefer the image I'm getting from my Walksnail Moonlight. It tends to be warmer and the colors look more pleasing and more natural to my eye. When it comes to dynamic range, if you ever fly in low light situations, and I'm not just talking about night scenes, but situations where there's a lot of shadows, the Walksnail Moonlight produces a much more usable image, especially for pilots who don't want to color grade and just want to pull something great off of the memory card. Although Walksnail doesn't have 10-bit recording and it doesn't have a flat color profile, but they can probably do that with a firmware update. Another reason you might want to give Walksnail a chance is there's no doubt that Walksnail is more in tune with the FPV community. And that's why Walksnail tends to have more frequent firmware updates, adding features and refining their products, while DJI software updates are much less frequent, and even logical or necessary updates might be delayed or might never happen. It's really a David versus Goliath approach. David will pay attention to your needs and concerns a lot more because he has to. He's not as big. What do you guys think about the Walksnail system? Does it stand up to DJI, or is it actually better in some ways? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.